The dust cloud on the horizon grew larger with each passing minute, and Sarah Robinson shaded her eyes against the late afternoon sun, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She had watched that road every single day for 10 years, waiting for a rider who never came, and now someone was approaching Val Verde at a steady gallop, the kind of pace a man makes when he is coming home after too long away. Sarah stood on the porch of her father's general store, her calico dress pressed neat despite the Texas heat of August 1878, her dark blonde hair pinned up in the way she always wore it, showing the elegant line of her neck. She was 28 now, no longer the 18-year-old girl who had kissed Fletcher Zimmerman goodbye on this very porch, promising to wait for him no matter how long it took. He had been 20 then, full of dreams and desperate need, riding out to make his fortune so he could come back worthy of her hand, worthy of asking her father for permission to marry. The rider came closer, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the way he sat in the saddle, that easy confidence, the broad shoulders that had held her close on stolen nights before he left. Her hands gripped the porch railing so tight her knuckles went white. "Sarah, get inside and help me with these dry goods," her father called from within the store, his voice gruff as always. She could not move. She could not breathe. The rider was close enough now that she could see his face beneath the brim of his hat, tanned and weathered by sun and wind, a decade of hardship written in the lines around his eyes, but it was him. It was Fletcher. He pulled his horse to a stop right in front of the store, sitting there for a long moment just looking at her, and she looked back, her eyes filling with tears she had sworn she would not cry. "Sarah," he said, and his voice was rougher than she remembered, deeper, but it still sent shivers down her spine. "Fletcher Zimmerman," she whispered, "you came back." He swung down from the saddle in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the dusty street, and he stood there with his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. "I know I am 10 years too late. I know I have no right to expect anything from you, but I had to come back. I had to see if you were still here, if you still remembered me." Sarah laughed, and it came out half-sob. "Remember you, Fletcher, I never stopped believing you would come back, not for one single day." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, and then Fletcher was striding toward her, taking the porch steps 2 at a time, and she was running to meet him. And when his arms closed around her, she felt like she could finally breathe again after holding her breath for a decade. He smelled like leather and horse and the wide open spaces, and when he pulled back to look at her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You waited," he said, his voice breaking. "Sweet Jesus, Sarah, you actually waited." "I told you I would," she said, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the rough stubble of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "I told you I would wait forever if I had to. What in the hell is going on out here?" Robert Robinson burst through the door of his store, his face red with anger, and then he stopped dead when he saw Fletcher. You have got a lot of nerve showing your face in this town again, boy." Fletcher released Sarah reluctantly and turned to face her father, his spine straight and his shoulders back. "Mr. Robinson, sir, I know I have been gone longer than I said. I know I broke my promise to come back in 2 years, but I never forgot about Sarah. I never stopped working toward the day I could come home to her." 10 years, Robert said, his voice cold as January ice. 10 years you have been gone, and my daughter has wasted her youth waiting for a man who never came. Do you know how many good men have asked for her hand? Men with property, with prospects, with the sense to stay in one place. And she turned them all down because of you. Sarah stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "That was my choice, Papa, not yours. You were a child when he left. You did not know any better." I was 18 years old and I knew my own heart. I still do. She looked at Fletcher, and her voice softened. And my heart has always belonged to Fletcher. Robert Robinson looked between his daughter and the cowboy, and something in his expression shifted, became less angry and more resigned. Come inside, both of you. I suppose you owe us an explanation at the very least, Zimmerman. They went into the store, Fletcher following Sarah and her father past the shelves stocked with flour and coffee and bolts of fabric. Robert led them through to the back room where the family took their meals, and Sarah gestured for Fletcher to sit at the rough-hewn table while she put a kettle on for coffee. Fletcher sat, placing his hat on the table, and began to speak. When I left Val Verde, I rode north to Colorado. I had heard there were silver strikes in the mountains, and I figured I could make my fortune quick and come home rich enough to provide for a wife. But it did not work out that way. He paused, and Sarah poured him coffee with shaking hands, her father watching with narrowed eyes. The silver mine I invested in collapsed. Not the tunnel, the business. The man running it was a swindler, and he took everything I had and disappeared. That was the first year. I spent the second year working in another man's mine, trying to earn back what I had lost, but there was an accident. Cave in. I got trapped underground for 3 days before they dug us out. Sarah gasped, her hand going to her mouth. Fletcher reached across the table and took her other hand, squeezing gently. I survived, but I was laid up for months healing. Broken leg, cracked ribs. By the time I could ride again, 3 years had passed, and I had nothing to show for it but scars. I was ashamed, Sarah. I could not come back to you empty-handed, not after promising I would make something of myself. I would not have cared about the money, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. I only cared about you. I know that now, but I was young and proud and stupid, so I kept trying. I worked as a ranch hand in Wyoming, saved every penny. I was going to buy land, start my own spread. But then the winter of '72 hit, the worst blizzard anyone had seen. We lost most of the cattle and the ranch went under. The owner could not even pay us for our last 6 months of work. Fletcher took a sip of his coffee, his eyes distant with memory. After that, I drifted. Worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the army, even tried my hand at buffalo hunting before the herds disappeared. Every job I took, I told myself I was getting closer to having enough to come home, but the years just kept slipping away. So what changed? Robert asked, his voice less hostile now, more curious. Why come back now? Fletcher met the older man's eyes steadily. Because I realized I was a fool. I realized that Sarah was never waiting for me to bring her wealth. She was waiting for me to come home. And every day I stayed away was a day stolen from us both. So I gathered what money I had, bought a decent horse, and I rode straight through to get here. Took me 3 weeks. What money you have, Robert said slowly. How much is that? About $300. It is not much, I know. But it is honest money, earned with hard work. And I can work harder. I can be the man Sarah deserves if you will give me a chance. Sarah looked at her father, pleading with her eyes, and after a long moment Robert sighed heavily. My daughter has been running this store mostly by herself for the past 5 years since her mother passed. She has kept the books, managed the inventory, dealt with the suppliers. She is the smartest person I know, and she has been wasting away in this town waiting for you. I know, sir. And I will spend the rest of my life making it up to her if she will have me. Papa, Sarah said softly, I love him. I have always loved him. Nothing is going to change that. Robert stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the street. There is a property for sale on the edge of town. Old Watson Place. 10 acres with a small ranch house, barn, good well. Watson died last month and his widow moved east to live with her sister. She is asking $500 for it. Fletcher's face fell. I do not have 500. I know you do not, but I do. Robert turned around, his expression stern. I will lend you the 200 you need, and you will pay me back at 5% interest. You will work that land and make it prosper, and you will take care of my daughter. Those are my terms. Fletcher stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Mr. Robinson, I do not know what to say. That is more generosity than I have any right to expect. It is not generosity. It is practicality. If I do not help you, Sarah will likely run off with you anyway, and then I will lose my best employee and my daughter. This way I get a son-in-law who owes me money, which means you have to stick around. But there was a hint of a smile on Robert's face as he said it. Sarah threw her arms around her father, hugging him tight. Thank you, Papa. Thank you so much. Yes, there is still the matter of a wedding to arrange. I assume you want to marry my daughter properly, Zimmerman. More than anything in the world, sir. Then we will talk to Reverend Michaels tomorrow. I suppose you will be wanting to get married as soon as possible, given how long you have both waited. Sarah looked at Fletcher, her eyes shining. Is that what you want, to marry me? Fletcher crossed to her in 2 strides and took both her hands in his. Sarah Robinson, I have loved you since I was 17 years old and you were 15, and you spilled an entire jar of pickles in your father's store and tried to clean them up before he noticed. I have loved you through 10 years and 1,000 miles. I have loved you through every hardship and every lonely night. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Sarah breathed. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He kissed her then, right there in front of her father, a kiss that was 10 years' worth of longing and love and promise, and Sarah felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Fletcher went to see the Watson property with Robert and agreed to buy it. The ranch house was small but well built, with 2 bedrooms and a good stone fireplace. The barn needed some repairs, but Fletcher declared he could handle that easily. The land itself was perfect, with good grass for cattle and a stream running through the southern portion. Sarah spent her time preparing for the wedding, which Reverend Michaels agreed to perform on the following Saturday. It would be a small ceremony, just family and a few close friends, but Sarah did not care about the size of the wedding. She only cared that at the end of it, she would finally be Fletcher's wife. On Wednesday afternoon, she was in the store helping her father stock shelves when the door opened and Martha Henley walked in. Martha had been Sarah's closest friend since childhood, and when she saw Sarah, her eyes went wide. "Is it true?" Martha demanded. "Betty Crawford told me that Fletcher Zimmerman rode into town 3 days ago and that you two are getting married on Saturday. Tell me it is true." Sarah could not keep the smile off her face. "It is true. Every word." Martha squealed and hugged her friend tight. "Oh, Sarah, I am so happy for you." "I was beginning to think he was never coming back. We all were." "I knew he would," Sarah said simply. "I always knew. You must tell me everything. Where has he been? What has he been doing? Does he look the same? Is he still handsome?" Sarah laughed. "He is more handsome than ever, if you can believe it. Older, of course, and there are lines on his face that were not there before. But his eyes are the same, and his smile, and the way he looks at me like I am the only woman in the world." "I want to hear every detail," Martha said, linking her arm through Sarah's. "Come, let us go for a walk and you can tell me everything." They walked out into the warm afternoon, strolling down the main street of Val Verde past the saloon and the bank and the smithy. Sarah told Martha about Fletcher's arrival, about the 10 years he had spent trying to make his fortune, about her father's surprising generosity in helping them buy the Watson place. "Your father agreed to lend him money." "Robert Robinson, who once threatened to shoot Billy Parker just for holding your hand at the church picnic," Sarah grinned. I think Papa realized that I was not going to change my mind, and I think he respects that Fletcher came back, even after all this time. He came back for me. They turned down a side street, and Sarah saw Fletcher ahead, coming out of the general supply store with lumber loaded on a wagon. He saw her too, and his whole face lit up in a way that made her breath catch. "Ladies," he said, tipping his hat. "Miss Martha, it is good to see you again." "Mr. Zimmerman, welcome home." Martha's voice was warm and she smiled at him genuinely. "I hope you know how lucky you are." "I do, madam. I am the luckiest man alive." He looked at Sarah. "I am heading out to the property to start on some repairs to the barn. Would you like to come see it?" "I know your father needs you at the store, but I thought maybe you could spare an hour." "I think Papa can manage for an hour," Sarah said. She looked at Martha. "Do you mind?" "Not at all. You two go. I have to get home anyway and start supper." Martha squeezed Sarah's hand. "I will see you Saturday at the wedding." Sarah climbed up onto the wagon seat next to Fletcher, very aware of the warmth of his body beside hers, the strength in his hands as he took up the reins. They drove out of town toward the property that would soon be their home, and Sarah felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a warm blanket. The ranch house sat on a low rise overlooking the grassland, the barn behind it weathered gray by sun and wind. Fletcher helped Sarah down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist, and she smiled up at him. "What do you think?" he asked. "Can you see yourself living here?" "I can see us living here," Sarah said. "I can see us building a life together, raising children here, growing old together." Fletcher pulled her close, resting his chin on the top of her head. "I have dreamed of this for so long. Sometimes I was afraid it was only a dream, that I would wake up and find out you had married someone else, that you had stopped waiting. I could never marry anyone else. My heart was always yours, Fletcher. From the moment you first smiled at me when we were children, I was yours." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Sarah melted into him. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "We should probably not do too much of that before the wedding," Fletcher said, his voice husky. "I want to do right by you, Sarah. I want to marry you proper with your father's blessing in front of God and everyone. I know, and I love you for that." Sarah took his hand. "Show me the house. I want to see our home." They walked to the ranch house together, and Fletcher opened the door. Inside was a main room with the fireplace, a kitchen area with a good iron stove, and 2 bedrooms off to the side. The furniture that came with the place was sparse but serviceable: a table and chairs, a dresser, a bed frame. The windows were clean and the floors were solid. "It is not much yet," Fletcher said, watching Sarah's face anxiously. "But I can add on to it. I can build more rooms as we need them. I can make it into a real home." "It is already a home," Sarah said, turning to him with shining eyes. "Because you are here and soon I will be here too. That is all it needs to be a home." They spent the afternoon together, Fletcher showing Sarah around the property, pointing out where he wanted to build a chicken coop and where he thought they could plant a garden. He talked about buying cattle, starting a small herd, maybe some horses. Sarah listened and added her own ideas, and they planned their future together as the sun sank lower in the sky. "I should get you back to town," Fletcher said reluctantly as the shadows grew long. "Your father will be wondering where you are." They drove back in the golden light of evening, and Fletcher left Sarah at the store with a chaste kiss on her cheek and a promise to see her tomorrow. Sarah went inside glowing with happiness, and her father looked at her with a mixture of amusement and resignation. "I suppose I have lost you already," Robert said. "No, Papa, you will never lose me, but my heart belongs to Fletcher now." "It always did," Robert said quietly. "Your mother saw it all those years ago. She told me that you and that Zimmerman boy were meant for each other." I wish she could be here to see you married." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I wish that too." Robert cleared his throat gruffly. "Well, no use dwelling on what cannot be. Come help me close up the store, and then we will have supper. You need to keep your strength up if you are going to be a rancher's wife." The days until the wedding flew by. Fletcher worked from dawn to dusk on the property, repairing the barn, fixing a broken shutter on the house, making everything ready. Sarah sewed herself a new dress for the ceremony, a beautiful pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Martha came over to help her fit it, and they talked and laughed like girls, even though they were both grown women now. On Friday evening, the night before the wedding, Fletcher came to the store for supper with Sarah and her father. It was a strange, bittersweet meal, all of them knowing that everything was about to change. Robert was quiet, but not unfriendly, and Fletcher did his best to be respectful and grateful. After the meal, Robert excused himself to go over the account books, leaving Sarah and Fletcher alone on the front porch in the gathering dusk. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked, sitting close beside Fletcher on the porch swing. "Terrified," Fletcher admitted. "Not about marrying you. That is the one thing I am certain of in this world, but about everything else. Being a husband, being a landowner, being worthy of you." "You are worthy of me," Sarah said firmly. "You always have been. The fact that you came back, that you kept your promise even though it took 10 years, that tells me everything I need to know about the man you are." Fletcher took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I am going to spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy. That is my vow to you, Sarah. Tomorrow in front of the Reverend and tonight right here, I will make you happy." "You already do," Sarah whispered. "Just by being here, by being mine, you make me happy." They sat together in the darkness, holding hands and talking in low voices about everything and nothing, until Robert came to the door and cleared his throat meaningfully. Fletcher took the hint and stood, pulling Sarah up with him. "I will see you tomorrow," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "Tomorrow you will be my wife." "I can hardly wait," Sarah said, and kissed him one more time before letting him go. Saturday dawned bright and clear, a perfect August morning. Sarah woke early, too excited to sleep, and spent extra time on her appearance. She washed her hair and pinned it up with the pearl combs her mother had worn at her own wedding. She put on her new blue dress and stood in front of the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. She looked radiant, alive with happiness. Martha arrived at 10 o'clock to walk with her to the church, and her father waited downstairs in his best suit. The ceremony was set for 11, and Sarah's hands shook slightly as she descended the stairs. "You look beautiful, Sarah," Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. "Your mother would be so proud." "Thank you, Papa." Sarah kissed his cheek, and then they set out for the church, a small white building at the end of Main Street. Fletcher was already there, standing at the altar with Reverend Michaels. He wore a new suit, dark and well-fitted, and his hair was neatly combed back. But it was his eyes that caught Sarah's attention, the way they lit up when he saw her, the way he looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever prayed. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. A handful of townspeople had come to witness it, people who had known Sarah all her life and who remembered Fletcher from before he left. They stood as Sarah walked down the aisle on her father's arm, and when Robert placed Sarah's hand in Fletcher's, there were tears in the older man's eyes. Reverend Michaels spoke about love and commitment, about the sanctity of marriage and the vows they were about to take. But Sarah barely heard him. All she could see was Fletcher. All she could feel was his hand holding hers, warm and strong and steady. "Do you, Fletcher James Zimmerman, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part." "I do," Fletcher said, his voice clear and firm. "And do you, Sarah Marie Robinson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Sarah said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of Texas and Almighty God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Fletcher, you may kiss your bride." Fletcher pulled Sarah into his arms and kissed her deeply, and the small congregation erupted in applause. Sarah kissed him back with 10 years of longing behind it, and when they finally broke apart, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. They walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife, out into the bright sunshine, and people crowded around to congratulate them. Martha hugged Sarah tight, and several of Fletcher's old friends from before he left clapped him on the back and welcomed him home. Robert had arranged for a small reception at the store, and they all walked back together, a happy procession through the streets of Val Verde. There was cake and punch, and someone had brought a fiddle, and soon there was dancing. Fletcher swept Sarah into his arms, and they waltzed around the crowded room, oblivious to everyone else. "I love you, Mrs. Zimmerman," Fletcher whispered in her ear. "I love you too, Mr. Zimmerman," Sarah said, and the sound of her married name on her lips filled her with joy. The celebration continued into the late afternoon, but eventually people began to drift away, heading home to their own families. Robert pulled Fletcher aside for a quiet word, and Sarah saw her father grip Fletcher's shoulder firmly before stepping back. "Take care of her," Robert said, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "I will, sir, I swear it." As the sun began to set, Fletcher and Sarah climbed into the wagon and drove out to their new home. The ranch house looked beautiful in the golden light, small but perfect, waiting for them. Fletcher carried Sarah over the threshold, and she laughed with delight. Inside, someone had left a fire laid in the fireplace ready to light, and a basket of food on the table. Sarah suspected Martha's handiwork and made a mental note to thank her friend. Fletcher set Sarah down gently, and they stood in the middle of their home, just looking at each other. The weight of the moment hung between them, 10 years of waiting finally over, the rest of their lives stretching out ahead. "I still cannot quite believe this is real," Fletcher said, reaching up to touch Sarah's face. "That you are really my wife, that we are really here together." "It is real," Sarah said, taking his hand and pressing it against her cheek. "This is real, Fletcher. We are real." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Sarah felt heat kindle in her belly. She had waited so long for this, dreamed of it through endless lonely nights. Now Fletcher was here, her husband, and she could finally show him the depths of her love. They made their way to the bedroom, helping each other undress with trembling hands, discovering each other in the growing darkness. Fletcher was gentle and reverent, treating Sarah like something precious, and when they finally came together, it was everything Sarah had dreamed it would be and more. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking in whispers, learning the rhythms of being married. "I am going to work so hard," Fletcher said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Sarah's bare shoulder. "I am going to make this ranch prosper. I am going to give you everything you deserve." "I already have everything I need," Sarah said, snuggling closer to him. "I have you." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and Sarah slept more peacefully than she had in 10 years. The next few months were a period of adjustment and hard work. Fletcher rose before dawn each day to tend to the animals and work on improving the property. Sarah split her time between helping her father at the store and working on making their house into a real home. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted a garden, and learned to cook on the iron stove. In October, Fletcher used part of their savings to buy 6 head of cattle from a rancher moving east. It was not much, but it was a start. He built a better fence and spent his days caring for the animals and cutting hay for the winter. Sarah continued to help her father 3 days a week at the store, and she was grateful for the work. It brought in steady money while they were building up the ranch, and it gave her father someone to talk to. Robert Robinson had been lonely since his wife's death, and Sarah knew he appreciated her company even if he never said so. In November, as the weather turned cooler, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then another, and when she was finally certain, she told Fletcher one night as they sat by the fire. "I think I am with child," she said quietly. Fletcher's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "Truly, Sarah, are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I have all the signs my mother told me about." Fletcher set down the piece of leather he had been mending and crossed to her, kneeling in front of her chair. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy? Sarah, I am over the moon. I am going to be a father." He laid his hand on her still flat stomach reverently. "There is a baby in there, our baby." "It will not be easy," Sarah warned. "Babies are a lot of work and we are still getting established. We will manage, we will make it work." Fletcher looked up at her, his eyes shining. "This is everything I wanted, Sarah. A home, a wife, a family. You have given me everything." Sarah ran her fingers through his hair, love swelling in her chest so powerfully it almost hurt. "We have given each other everything." When Sarah told her father the news the next week, Robert's reaction was more subdued but no less pleased. "A grandchild," he said, a rare smile crossing his weathered face. "Well, I suppose I will need to start working on a cradle." The winter passed slowly, with cold winds sweeping down from the north and occasional snow. Fletcher worked tirelessly to keep the ranch running and to prepare for the baby's arrival. He added a 3rd room onto the house, a nursery, and Robert did indeed build a beautiful cradle from oak wood, carving it with care. Sarah's pregnancy progressed normally, though she was often tired and had bouts of morning sickness that left her weak. Fletcher was attentive and worried, fussing over her constantly until she had to laugh and tell him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "I am having a baby, not dying of consumption," she said one afternoon when he tried to insist she stay in bed all day. "I just want you to be safe," Fletcher said, looking so concerned that Sarah softened. "I know, and I love you for it. But women have been having babies since the dawn of time, Fletcher. I will be fine." Still, she was secretly glad of his attentiveness. The baby made her feel vulnerable in a way she never had before, aware of how much she had to lose, how precious this life they were building together truly was. In early March of 1879, when the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom on the prairie, Sarah went into labor. Fletcher rode hard to fetch the midwife, an older woman named Clara Simmons who had delivered half the babies in Val Verde. And then he paced anxiously in the main room while Sarah labored in the bedroom with Clara and Martha attending her. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Fletcher wore a path in the floor with his pacing, and when he finally heard the thin wail of a newborn baby, he thought his heart might stop. Clara came out wiping her hands on a towel, a tired smile on her face. "Congratulations, Mr. Zimmerman, you have a son." "A son," Fletcher breathed. "And Sarah, is she all right?" "She is tired, but she is fine. Both mother and baby are healthy. You can go in and see them now." Fletcher did not wait to be told twice. He burst into the bedroom and found Sarah propped up on pillows, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up when he entered, and her smile made him weak in the knees. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Fletcher approached the bed as if walking on holy ground. He sat carefully on the edge and looked down at the baby in Sarah's arms. His son. He had a son. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny perfect fingers that waved in the air. "He is beautiful," Fletcher whispered. "He is perfect. He has your eyes," Sarah said. "I can tell already." "What should we name him?" Fletcher asked, reaching out to gently touch the baby's soft cheek. "I was thinking Samuel," Sarah said. "Samuel Fletcher Zimmerman." "Samuel means God has heard, and God certainly heard my prayers." "Samuel," Fletcher repeated. "I like that. Hello, Samuel. I am your father, and I promise I will always take care of you and your mother. I will never leave you the way I left your mother waiting. I will be here always." Sarah reached up and touched Fletcher's face, her eyes full of love. "I know you will. You are a good man, Fletcher. You are going to be a wonderful father." The baby fussed, and Sarah adjusted him to nurse, and Fletcher watched in awe as his son latched on and began to feed. The sight of his wife nursing their child filled him with a fierce, protective love that was almost overwhelming. Robert came to visit that afternoon, bringing gifts of baby clothes that Sarah suspected he had ordered specially from a catalog. He held his grandson with surprising gentleness, and Fletcher saw tears in the older man's eyes. "He looks like you did as a baby, Sarah," Robert said quietly. "Same nose, same chin. Your mother would have been so happy." The weeks after Samuel's birth were exhausting but joyful. The baby woke frequently at night, and Sarah was often tired, but Fletcher helped as much as he could, walking the floor with Samuel when he fussed, changing his cloths, anything to ease Sarah's burden. The ranch kept Fletcher busy during the day, but he found he did not mind the hard work. He was providing for his family, building something for his son's future. The cattle were thriving, and he had managed to save enough to buy 3 more head. It was slow going, but it was progress. In June, when Samuel was 3 months old and beginning to smile and coo, Fletcher came home from checking the fences to find Sarah in the garden, the baby asleep in a basket beside her while she weeded. She looked up when she heard him approach, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. "How was your day?" she asked. "Good, productive. I finished repairing the north fence line." He sat down beside her, pulling off his hat and wiping the sweat from his forehead. "How is Samuel?" "Perfect, as always. He has been asleep for almost an hour now. I am making the most of the quiet to get some work done." Fletcher reached over and took Sarah's hand, dusty from the garden. "I have been thinking. About us, about the ranch, about the future." "Oh, what have you been thinking?" "I want to write letters to some of the men I worked with up in Wyoming. Good men. Honest cowboys who know cattle. I was thinking maybe in another year or two, when we are more established, I could hire on a hand or two. Really start building up the herd, maybe start breeding horses as well." Sarah smiled. "That sounds like a good plan, but we are doing all right as we are, Fletcher. You do not need to push so hard. I want to give you more. I want Samuel to grow up with security, with opportunities. I want him to have the kind of life I never had." "You are giving us that already," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "You are here, you are working hard, you are a good husband and father. That is all Samuel needs. That is all I need." Fletcher pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I am the luckiest man alive, you know that." "I know," Sarah said, laughing. "You tell me almost every day. I will tell you every day for the rest of our lives, and it still will not be enough times." The summer passed in a blur of activity. The garden flourished, and Sarah spent hours canning vegetables and making preserves for the winter. Fletcher's cattle multiplied as one of the cows had a calf, a healthy heifer that Fletcher declared was a good sign for the future. Samuel grew rapidly, his personality emerging more each day. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and he seemed fascinated by everything around him. In August, Martha came to visit with her own news. She had been courting Thomas Brennan, the new schoolteacher who had arrived in Val Verde that spring, and he had asked her to marry him. "Oh, Martha, I am so happy for you," Sarah exclaimed, hugging her friend. "Thomas is a good man." "He is," Martha agreed, her eyes shining. "I never thought I would find someone, to be honest. I was starting to think I would be a spinster forever. But then Thomas came to town, and everything changed." "I know exactly how you feel," Sarah said, thinking of Fletcher's return after 10 years. "When you find the right person, everything just falls into place." Martha's wedding was held in September, a lovely ceremony followed by a large reception at the town hall. Sarah and Fletcher attended with Samuel, and Sarah felt a pang of nostalgia watching her friend marry. It seemed like just yesterday they were young girls, dreaming of their futures. Now they were both married women with lives of their own. As autumn approached and the weather began to cool, Fletcher received a letter from one of his old friends from Wyoming, a cowboy named Jack Morrison. Jack wrote that he had heard Fletcher had settled down in Texas and was starting a ranch, and he wondered if Fletcher might have use for an experienced hand. He was looking for steady work and a place to settle. Fletcher showed the letter to Sarah over dinner. "What do you think?" "Jack is a good man, honest and hardworking. We could use the help, especially if we want to expand." "Can we afford to pay him?" Sarah asked practically. "If he is willing to work for room and board plus a small wage, yes. We would have to build a bunkhouse, but that would not take long. And having an extra pair of hands would free me up to focus on breeding and improving the herd." Sarah considered it carefully. "If you trust him, then I think it is a good idea. We cannot do everything ourselves forever." Fletcher wrote back to Jack the next day, offering him a position starting in the spring. Jack's response came 3 weeks later, enthusiastically accepting. Winter came early that year, with the first snow falling in late October. Fletcher worked to make sure all the animals were secure, and that they had enough hay stored for the cold months. Sarah busied herself with caring for Samuel, who was now crawling and getting into everything, and with sewing warmer clothes for the family. On Christmas Eve, they celebrated quietly at home, just the three of them. Fletcher had carved a wooden horse for Samuel, who was too young to appreciate it yet but would treasure it when he was older. Sarah had made Fletcher a new shirt from fabric she had carefully saved for. They sat by the fire together, Samuel asleep in his cradle, and counted their blessings. "A year and a half ago I was alone on the trail, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life by staying away so long," Fletcher said quietly. "Now I have you and Samuel and a home." "I have everything." "We have everything," Sarah corrected gently. "We have each other." The winter was mild compared to what Fletcher had experienced in Wyoming, but there were still hard days when the wind blew cold and snow drifted against the barn. They spent many evenings by the fire, Sarah sewing or reading while Fletcher carved small toys for Samuel or worked on tack repairs. In February, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. She told Fletcher on a Sunday afternoon, and he reacted with the same joy and awe he had shown the first time. "Another baby," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "Our family is growing." "It will be harder this time with Samuel to care for as well," Sarah warned, "but I am happy about it. I will help more. And maybe by the time the baby comes, Jack will be here and I will not be as tied up with the ranch work." True to his word, Jack Morrison arrived in late March of 1880, riding in on a sturdy bay horse with all his possessions in a pack behind his saddle. He was a tall, lean man in his early 30s, weathered by years of outdoor work, with kind eyes and a ready smile. Fletcher welcomed him warmly, and introduced him to Sarah and Samuel. Jack was shy around Sarah at first, respectful and formal, but he warmed up quickly when he saw how friendly she was. "Mrs. Zimmerman, it is a pleasure to meet you. Fletcher talked about you constantly when we worked together. I feel like I already know you. Please call me Sarah. And welcome to our home. I hope you will be happy here." Jack proved to be as hardworking and reliable as Fletcher had promised. The two men built a small bunkhouse in a week, and Jack settled in. He was good with cattle and had a way with horses that impressed Fletcher. With Jack's help, they were able to expand the herd significantly, buying several more head of cattle at good prices from a neighboring rancher. As Sarah's pregnancy progressed, she was grateful for Jack's presence. Fletcher was able to spend more time at the house helping her, especially in the last few months when she grew large and unwieldy. Samuel was an active toddler now, into everything, and keeping up with him while carrying another baby was exhausting. In September, Sarah went into labor again. This time the birth was quicker, only about 6 hours, and when it was over they had a daughter. Fletcher held her with tears streaming down his face, marveling at how tiny and perfect she was. "She has your hair," he told Sarah, touching the fine blonde wisps on the baby's head. "And your pretty face. What should we name her?" Sarah asked. "I was thinking Rose Marie after your mother." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "That is perfect. Papa will be so touched." Robert was indeed moved when they told him, and he came to visit frequently in the weeks after Rose's birth, clearly smitten with his granddaughter. He brought gifts and helped out where he could, and Sarah saw a side of her father she had never seen before, softer and more openly affectionate. With 2 young children, life became busier than ever. Fletcher and Jack worked hard on the ranch, which was beginning to turn a real profit. They had 20 head of cattle now and had started breeding horses as Fletcher had planned. Sarah managed the household, cared for the children, and still found time to help her father at the store once a week. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Samuel grew into a sturdy boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's determination. Rose was a sweet-natured child, affectionate and quick to laugh. Fletcher and Jack built the ranch into one of the more prosperous small operations in the area, known for quality cattle and well-trained horses. In the spring of 1883, Jack announced that he had been courting a widow in town, Emily Dawson, and that they were planning to marry. Fletcher was delighted for his friend, and insisted on helping him build a small house on the property for him and his new bride. "You have been a good friend and partner, Jack. I am glad to see you settling down." "I learned from the best," Jack said with a grin. "You and Sarah showed me what a good marriage looks like." Emily proved to be a wonderful addition to their small community. She and Sarah became close friends, and it was nice for Sarah to have another woman nearby to talk to. Emily and Jack had their first child a year after they married, a son named Jacob, and the children all played together while their parents worked. Robert Robinson's health began to decline in 1884. He was 65 years old and had worked hard his entire life, and the years were catching up with him. Sarah spent more time helping him at the store, and Fletcher worried about her exhausting herself. In October of that year, Robert called Sarah and Fletcher to his home. He looked tired but peaceful, sitting in his favorite chair by the fire. "I have been thinking about the future," he said without preamble. "I am not getting any younger and the store is getting to be too much for me to manage." "Papa, you should have said something," Sarah said, alarmed. "I could help more. You have your own family to take care of, and I am proud of what you and Fletcher have built. But I have a proposition. I want to sell you the store." "The store?" Fletcher repeated, surprised. "Sir, I do not know anything about running a store." "But Sarah does. She has been helping me for years. She knows the inventory, the suppliers, the customers, and the store is profitable. It would be a good investment, something stable to supplement the ranch income. Sarah looked at Fletcher, and he could see she was interested. It would mean we could diversify, she said thoughtfully, not rely entirely on cattle and horses, and it would keep the store in the family. How much would you want for it? Fletcher asked Robert. I will sell it to you for $4,000. That is well below market value, but I want to keep it in the family. You can pay me over time, say $200 a year at 3% interest. Fletcher did the math quickly in his head. It was a fair deal, more than fair. And they could afford it. The ranch had been doing well and they had money saved. We would be honored to buy the store, sir, Fletcher said. Thank you for this opportunity. Robert nodded, looking relieved. Good, I will draw up the papers. And I will stay on for a few months to help with the transition. Make sure everything goes smoothly. The store became theirs at the start of 1885, and Sarah took over managing it with Fletcher's help. She hired a young man named David Porter to work the counter while she managed the books and ordering. Fletcher split his time between the store and the ranch, with Jack handling most of the day-to-day ranch work. Robert moved into a small house near the church, enjoying a quieter life. He spent his days reading, visiting his grandchildren, and attending church services. He seemed content, and Sarah was glad to see him finally able to rest. The store did well under Sarah's management. She had a head for business and a way with customers that kept people coming back. Fletcher marveled at how well she balanced everything, running the store, managing their home, and raising two lively children. In the summer of 1886, Sarah discovered she was pregnant for the third time. She was 36 now, and this pregnancy was harder on her body than the previous two had been. Fletcher worried constantly, and Sarah had to reassure him repeatedly that she was fine. I am not made of china, she said one evening when Fletcher insisted she sit down and rest instead of helping with dinner. Women have babies at my age all the time. I know, but you are my wife. I am allowed to worry. Their third child, another son, was born in February of 1887 after a long, difficult labor that left Sarah weak and exhausted. They named him Thomas, after Sarah's grandfather, and he was a tiny baby, smaller than Samuel or Rose had been. But he was healthy and strong, with a determined cry that made them both laugh. We have 3 children now, Fletcher said, holding baby Thomas while Sarah rested. A whole family. A beautiful family, Sarah agreed. She was tired down to her bones, but she was happy. Looking at Fletcher with their newborn son in his arms, she thought about how far they had come. 10 years of waiting, 10 years of faith, and then all these years of building a life together. It had been worth every moment. Samuel was 7 now, old enough to help with simple chores around the ranch. He idolized his father and followed Fletcher around whenever he could, learning about cattle and horses. Rose was 6, a bright, curious child who loved to read and help her mother at the store. She had her grandfather Robert's head for numbers and could already count change for customers. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the changing seasons. The children grew, the business prospered, and Fletcher and Sarah's love for each other only deepened with time. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, from harsh winters to drought years that tested the ranch's resilience. But they always faced everything together, partners in the truest sense. In 1890, on their 12th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Sarah on a picnic to the spot overlooking their property where he had first brought her all those years ago. The children were staying with their grandfather for the afternoon, giving Fletcher and Sarah a rare moment alone. They sat on a blanket in the grass, eating the meal Sarah had packed, and looking out over the land they had built together. The ranch was thriving now, with a good-sized herd and a reputation for quality horses. The store continued to do well, providing stable income. They had 3 healthy children and a community of friends. "You remember when I first brought you here?" Fletcher asked, taking Sarah's hand. "You said you could see us building a life together, raising children, growing old." "I remember," Sarah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And we have done all of that." "We are not old yet," Fletcher protested with a laugh. "No, but we are getting there. You have gray in your hair now." "So do you," Fletcher pointed out, touching a strand of Sarah's hair that was now more silver than gold. "I suppose we are, but I do not mind. Every gray hair represents a year we spent together, a year we built this life." Sarah turned to look at him. "Do you ever regret it, coming back here? Sometimes I wonder if you would have been happier out there, free and unencumbered." Fletcher took her face in his hands. "Sarah, I never regret a single moment. Those 10 years I was gone, I was not free. I was in prison, a prison of my own making, separated from the only woman I ever loved. Coming home to you was like finally being able to breathe again. This life, this family, this is everything I ever wanted." Sarah kissed him, a kiss that still held the passion and promise of their youth. "I love you, Fletcher Zimmerman. I loved you when I was 18 and you rode away. I loved you through 10 years of waiting, and I will love you until the day I die. And I love you. I always have, I always will." They stayed there until the sun began to set, wrapped in each other's arms, talking and laughing and remembering all they had been through together. When they finally drove back to collect the children, they were both smiling, their hands clasped together on the wagon seat. Robert Robinson passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1891. He was 72 years old and had lived to see his daughter happy and his grandchildren thriving. The funeral was well attended, a testament to how respected he had been in the community. Sarah grieved for her father, but she was comforted by the fact that he had died knowing she was loved and cared for. After Robert's death, Sarah found a letter he had left for her, to be read after he was gone. In it, he told her how proud he was of the woman she had become, how glad he was that Fletcher had come home, and how much he had loved being a grandfather. He ended the letter by saying that he was at peace, knowing that Sarah had found the happiness she deserved. Sarah cried when she read it, and Fletcher held her while she mourned. But there was also joy in the tears, gratitude for the years they had all shared. Life continued. Samuel grew into a strong young man, taking on more responsibility at the ranch. At 16, he could handle most of the work himself, and Fletcher relied on him heavily. Rose became a skilled businesswoman, helping her mother run the store with efficiency and grace. Thomas, at 9 years old, was showing signs of being the scholar of the family, always with his nose in a book. In 1893, Fletcher and Sarah celebrated their 15th anniversary. They were both in their mid-40s now, settled and content. Fletcher still rose early to work the ranch, though his body protested more than it used to. Sarah's hands were sometimes stiff from arthritis, but she still managed the store with skill. One evening in the late spring, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained through all the years of their marriage. Samuel was out checking the cattle with Jack, Rose was reading to Thomas inside, and for the moment everything was peaceful. "You remember the day I rode back into town?" Fletcher asked suddenly. "The look on your face when you saw me," Sarah smiled. "I thought I was dreaming. I had waited so long, and there you were, real and solid and finally home. You said you never stopped believing I would come back. I meant it. Even when everyone told me to give up, to accept that you were never coming home, I knew you would. I felt it in my heart." Fletcher pulled her close. Your faith in me saved my life, Sarah. There were times out there when I wanted to give up, when it would have been easier to just disappear. But I kept thinking of you waiting for me, believing in me, and I could not let you down. You never did let me down. You came home. You kept your promise. And I will keep on keeping it, every day for the rest of my life. They sat together in the gathering darkness, two people who had loved each other through separation and hardship, who had built a life together against all odds. The years had marked them, changed them, but the love between them had only grown stronger. As the stars came out overhead, Fletcher thought about how different his life might have been if he had never had the courage to come home. He might have died alone somewhere out in the territories, just another drifter with no family and no legacy. Instead, he had this: a thriving ranch, a successful business, 3 wonderful children, and the woman he loved more than life itself by his side. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, noticing his silence. "About how lucky I am. About how none of this would exist if you had not waited for me, if you had not believed." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Sarah said firmly. "It was love, pure and simple, love that was strong enough to survive 10 years of separation. Love that was worth waiting for." "Worth waiting for," Fletcher repeated softly. "Yes, that is exactly what it was, what we are." In 1895, when Samuel was 20, he announced that he was courting a girl named Anna Peterson, whose family had moved to Val Verde a few years earlier. Fletcher and Sarah approved of the match, and Samuel and Anna were married that fall in the same church where Fletcher and Sarah had exchanged their vows 17 years earlier. Fletcher built Samuel and Anna a house on the far side of the property, near where Jack and Emily lived with their 3 children. The ranch was becoming a small community now, multiple families working together, and Fletcher found satisfaction in knowing that what he and Sarah had built would continue through their children. Rose showed no interest in marrying, much to Sarah's gentle concern. She was 23 and beautiful, with plenty of suitors, but she declared she was too busy helping run the store to think about men. "Not all women need to marry to be happy, Mama," she said one day when Sarah broached the subject. "I know that, dear. I just want you to be happy, whatever that looks like for you." "I am happy," Rose insisted. "I love working at the store. I love being part of this family. Maybe someday I will meet someone who makes me want to change my plans. But for now, I am content." Thomas, at 14, was already talking about going to university. He wanted to study law, perhaps become a lawyer or even a judge. Fletcher and Sarah encouraged his ambitions, setting aside money each year for his education. As the century drew to a close, Fletcher and Sarah found themselves in a period of reflection. They were in their late 40s now, and while they were still healthy and active, they were aware of their own mortality in a way they had not been when they were younger. One night in December of 1899, as the new century loomed, they lay in bed talking about the past and the future. "We have lived an entire life together," Sarah mused. "When I think back to that girl who waited 10 years, she seems like someone else entirely." "She was someone else," Fletcher said. "That girl became this remarkable woman, and I have been blessed to watch the transformation. And you, the young man who rode away, is not the man lying beside me now. No, he grew up. He learned what really matters in life. He learned that love and family are worth more than any amount of gold or glory." "I am glad you came home," Sarah whispered. "I am glad we got to have this life together. So am I. Every single day I am grateful." They welcomed the new century together, celebrating with their children and grandchildren. Samuel and Anna had given them 2 grandsons by then, and looking forward to whatever the future would bring. In the spring of 1901, Fletcher woke one morning with chest pains. Sarah immediately sent Samuel for the doctor, fear clutching at her heart. The doctor examined Fletcher and diagnosed him with a weak heart, likely the result of years of hard physical labor and the lingering effects of his time trapped in the mine collapse all those years ago. "You need to take it easy," the doctor said firmly. "No more heavy work. Let your son handle the ranch." Fletcher chafed at the restrictions, but Sarah was adamant. "I did not wait 10 years for you, and then spend 23 years married to you just to lose you now because you were too stubborn to slow down." So Fletcher stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, turning most of the responsibility over to Samuel. It was hard at first, feeling useless, but he found new ways to contribute. He worked on the books, planned breeding strategies, and spent time with his grandchildren, teaching them about horses and cattle. Sarah, too, began to slow down. She was 51 now, and the store was becoming too much for her to manage alone. She made Rose a full partner, officially splitting ownership and responsibility. Rose took to the role eagerly, implementing new ideas and expanding their stock. In the summer of 1903, Thomas graduated from the University of Texas with a law degree. The whole family traveled to Austin for the ceremony, proud beyond measure. Thomas returned to Val Verde to practice law, opening an office on Main Street, and Fletcher and Sarah took great satisfaction in knowing that all 3 of their children were successful and happy. The years continued their steady march forward. Fletcher's heart troubled him from time to time, but he managed it carefully, and Sarah watched over him like a hawk. They spent their days in comfortable companionship, sitting on the porch, tending the garden, playing with their growing number of grandchildren. In 1908, when they celebrated their 30th anniversary, Samuel and Anna threw them a party that the whole town attended. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate the couple who had become legendary in Val Verde for their enduring love story. Fletcher stood up to make a speech, Sarah beside him, and his voice was strong despite his age. 30 years ago, I married the woman I had loved for 12 years already. She had waited for me through 10 years of separation, never losing faith that I would return. That kind of love is rare, and I have spent every day since trying to be worthy of it. Sarah, you are my heart, my home, my everything. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you tomorrow even more than today." Sarah was crying openly, and so were many of the guests. She stood up and took Fletcher's hand. "Fletcher came back to me when he could have stayed away, when it would have been easier to start fresh somewhere else. He came back because he loved me, and he has proven that love every single day through 3 decades of marriage. I am the luckiest woman alive, and I thank God every day for bringing him home to me." The party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and laughter. Fletcher and Sarah danced together, moving slowly to accommodate Fletcher's weak heart and Sarah's stiff joints, but they were as close as they had been on their wedding day. As they swayed together, Sarah said quietly, "Do you remember what you promised me? That day you came home. I promised you many things. You promised you would spend the rest of your life making me happy. And have I succeeded?" Fletcher asked, looking down at her. "Every single day. You have made me happier than I ever dreamed possible." They lived on together through the years, watching their grandchildren grow, seeing Rose finally fall in love with a banker from a neighboring town, and marry at 35, celebrating as Thomas became a respected lawyer and eventually a district judge. They weathered the changes that came with the new century, the automobiles that began to appear in Val Verde, the telephone lines that connected them to the wider world. In the spring of 1915, Fletcher's heart finally gave out. He was 67 years old, and he died peacefully in his sleep with Sarah beside him, her hand clasped in his. Sarah woke to find him gone, and her grief was profound, a physical pain that left her hollow. But even in her sorrow, she found comfort. They had had 37 years of marriage, 47 years of loving each other. They had built a life together, raised a family, created a legacy that would endure through their children and grandchildren. Fletcher had come home to her, had kept every promise he ever made, and she had been blessed beyond measure. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over Texas to pay their respects. Fletcher was laid to rest in the Val Verde Cemetery, under a spreading oak tree, and Sarah stood beside his grave with her children and grandchildren around her. "He was the best man I ever knew," Samuel said, his voice thick with tears. "He loved us all so much," Rose added. "He was a good father," Thomas said simply. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Yes, Fletcher had been all of those things. But most of all, he had been hers, her love, her partner, her heart. Sarah lived for 3 more years after Fletcher's death. She remained active, helping with the store and the ranch when she could. But mostly she spent her time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the days when Val Verde was just a dusty frontier town, about the cowboy who rode away and then came home again. On a warm evening in June of 1918, Sarah sat on her porch watching the sunset, just as she and Fletcher had done thousands of times before. She felt tired, ready to rest. Her children were successful and happy, her grandchildren were thriving, and the legacy she and Fletcher had built was secure. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Sarah closed her eyes. And there was Fletcher, young and strong and smiling, reaching out his hand to her. "I have been waiting for you," he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered it from that day he had ridden back into town. "I knew you would be," Sarah said, taking his hand. "You always kept your promises." They found Sarah the next morning, peaceful and still in her chair, a slight smile on her face. She was laid to rest beside Fletcher, under the oak tree, and their shared headstone read simply, "Fletcher and Sarah Zimmerman, together forever." Their children and grandchildren continued to work the ranch and run the store, passing down the story of the cowboy who came home after 10 years, and the woman who never stopped believing he would return. It became a legend in Val Verde, a testament to the power of love and faith and commitment. The ranch prospered through the decades, through wars and depressions and changing times. The store remained in the family for generations. And Fletcher and Sarah's descendants always told the story with pride, how their ancestors had built something beautiful out of faith and patience, and a love that was stronger than time or distance. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the wealth they had accumulated or the property they had owned, but the love they had shared and the family they had created. Fletcher had come home, and Sarah had been waiting. And together, they had built a life that was worth every moment of the 10 long years apart, a life that endured long after they were gone, a legacy of love that would never fade.